In the summer of 1518, a woman walked into the street and started dancing. No music, no festival, no crowd cheering her on, just a woman alone, moving in the middle of a street in the city of Strasbourg. At first, people probably thought she was drunk, or grieving, or possessed, or maybe just having some kind of breakdown, because this was not normal dancing. This was not celebration. This was not joy. She danced for hours, then longer, then through the day, then into the night. And when morning came, she was still dancing. Now that alone would be strange enough. One woman dancing uncontrollably until her body started to fail. But that is not the strange part. The strange part is what happened next. Because within days, other people joined her. Not because there was music, not because someone invited them, not because this was a party. They joined because something seemed to spread. A rhythm with no song, a sickness with no fever, a plague with no cough. And before long, the streets of Strasbourg were filled with people dancing as if their bodies no longer belonged to them. But here's what makes this story so much darker. The city leaders saw this happening. They looked at people collapsing from exhaustion. They watched the crowd grow. And then they decided the best cure was to give them more room to dance. They cleared out public spaces. They opened guild halls. They hired musicians. They brought in drummers. They encouraged the dancers to keep going. Because according to the doctors of the time, the only way to cure the dancing was to dance it out. And that decision may have turned a strange incident into one of the most bizarre outbreaks in recorded history. This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518. And the most disturbing part is not that people danced until they collapsed. The most disturbing part is that nobody really knows why it happened. To understand why this story matters, you have to picture Strasbourg before the dancing started. This was not a city in a golden age. This was not a place overflowing with comfort, food, and stability. This was a city under pressure. People were hungry. Disease was common, life was harsh, death was close, and for ordinary people, the world did not feel like something they controlled. Crops could fail, children could die, taxes could crush you, a strange illness could arrive and erase a family. And when people did not understand why something terrible was happening, they often reached for explanations that made sense inside their world. Maybe God was angry, maybe a saint had been offended, maybe a curse had fallen on the town, maybe demons were involved. So when one woman began dancing and could not stop, people did not see it the way we would see it. Today, someone might say panic attack, neurological condition, psychogenic illness, toxic exposure, mental break. But in 1518, people were living inside a different map of reality. And in that map, a body moving against its will could mean something spiritual, something dangerous, something contagious, something sent as punishment. Which means the people watching may not have just been confused, they may have been terrified. Because if this was punishment, then anybody could be next. And that is where this story starts to turn. Because fear does not just watch, fear participates, fear spreads. Fear looks at one person shaking and starts checking its own hands. Fear sees one person collapse and starts wondering if its own knees feel weak. Fear hears a rumor and turns it into a symptom. And in Strasbourg, the fear started moving from person to person until one dancer became several became dozens, and eventually the city was facing something it had no category for, a public crisis made out of movement. Imagine standing in that street. You hear feet scraping stone, you see bodies turning, arms jerking, faces empty, people sweating through their clothes, some crying, some begging for help, some unable to explain why they are still moving. And the worst part is there is no enemy, no invading army, no visible infection, no monster in the street, just people dancing. And because dancing is normally a sign of life, the brain almost doesn't know how to process it as horror. That's what makes this so unsettling. If people were screaming, you would understand. If they were bleeding, you would understand. If they were running, you would understand. But dancing? Dancing belongs at weddings, harvest festivals, celebrations. It belongs to music, to joy, to release. But in Strasbourg, dance became the disease. The thing people do when life feels light became the thing that trapped them. And that contradiction is why the story still sticks over 500 years later. Because it feels impossible. But it happened. Historical records from the time describe people dancing in Strasbourg in 1518. Not just one person. a growing group, a public emergency, a strange outbreak that forced the city authorities to respond. And their response tells us something incredibly important. When people don't understand a crisis, they often make it worse with total confidence. The city asked the physicians what was happening, and the physicians gave an answer that sounds absurd today, but at the time, it probably felt scientific. They said the dancers were suffering from overheated blood, hot blood, a kind of internal imbalance that had to burn itself out. So the cure was not rest, not isolation, not food, not water, not silence. The cure was more dancing, which means the city essentially built a stage for the epidemic. They moved dancers into public areas, they gave them space, they hired musicians to keep the rhythm going. And this is the point where the story becomes almost unbelievable, because imagine seeing people unable to stop dancing and then bringing in music. Imagine seeing exhaustion and prescribing motion. Imagine seeing panic and adding drums. But that is what they did. Because inside their understanding of the body, it made sense. Let the poison out, let the heat burn away, let the movement finish what it started. But here's what's fascinating. The dancing did not stop. It spread. Because what if the music did not cure the outbreak? What if it gave the outbreak a structure? What if it told the terrified people watching from the edges, this is real, this is happening. The city believes in it, the doctors believe in it, the musicians are here, the halls are open. The crisis has a rhythm now, and once a fear has a rhythm, people can fall into it. This is one of the strangest parts of human beings. We like to imagine we are separate from crowds. We like to think our body is ours, our mind is ours, our fear is private. But history keeps showing us that people are more connected than they want to admit. A laugh can spread, a yawn can spread, panic can spread, a rumor can spread, a belief can spread, and sometimes symptoms can spread too. Not because people are faking, not because they are weak, not because they want attention, but because the human nervous system is not sealed off from the world. It listens, it copies, it mirrors, it absorbs, and when enough pressure builds inside enough people, one person's collapse can become a language other bodies understand. That may be one explanation for what happened in Strasbourg. Not the only one, but one of the most compelling. The city had already been under extreme stress, famine, disease, religious fear, social tension. And then one woman began to dance. Her body became the symbol, the crowd became the amplifier, the authorities became the stage crew, and the musicians became the soundtrack to a nightmare. But here's where the mystery deepens. Because Strasbourg was not the only place this happened. Long before 1518, Europe had seen other outbreaks of dancing mania. Groups of people moving uncontrollably, sometimes in processions, sometimes for days, sometimes described as being in trance-like states. These outbreaks were often connected to religious fear, to saints, to punishment, to the belief that the body could be seized by forces beyond ordinary explanation. So when Strasbourg erupted in dancing, it was not completely without precedent. People had stories for this, they had legends, they had warnings, and that matters, because if a culture already believes that a certain kind of affliction can happen, then fear knows what shape to take. Think about that. A modern person under stress might say, I'm burned out, I'm having anxiety, I'm having a panic attack, I can't sleep, my chest feels tight. But in a different time, under a different belief system, distress may express itself differently, not because people are pretending, because every culture gives suffering a vocabulary. And in Strasbourg, one available vocabulary was dance. A terrible dance. A cursed dance. A dance associated with Saint Vitus, who many believed could punish people by forcing them to dance. So when the doctors failed and the music failed and the dancers kept moving, the city's explanation shifted. Maybe this was not hot blood. Maybe this was spiritual. Maybe they had offended St. Vitus, and once again the solution changed. The same city that had encouraged dancing began restricting it. Music was banned, public dancing was discouraged, some dancers were taken to a shrine, they were given ritual attention, red shoes, holy water, crosses, prayers. The cure moved from medicine to religion, from the dance floor to the chapel. And then slowly, the outbreak ended, which creates an uncomfortable question. Did the shrine cure them? Did the ritual calm the fear? Did the dancers simply collapse and recover over time? Did the social conditions change? Did the city finally stop feeding the outbreak? Or did the story end because every panic eventually runs out of fuel? Nobody knows. And that is why this event has never fully left history. Because it sits in a strange place between medicine, religion, psychology, and myth. Close enough to fact to be recorded, strange enough to feel impossible. Over the centuries, people have tried to explain what really happened. One theory says it may have been caused by ergot, a fungus that can grow on grain and produce toxic effects when contaminated bread is eaten. Ergot poisoning has been blamed for other strange historical episodes too: hallucinations, convulsions, burning sensations, distorted perception. And at first, that sounds like it could explain a dancing plague. Bad grain, poisoned bread, a whole city affected. Simple, clean, almost satisfying. But then the theory starts to run into problems because people with severe ergot poisoning usually do not dance continuously for days. They get very sick, they may convulse, they may hallucinate, they may suffer terrible physical symptoms. But a coordinated outbreak of prolonged dancing is harder to explain that way, and it does not fully explain why the outbreak took the shape that it did. Why dancing? Why in public? Why spread through observation? Why in a region where stories of dancing mania already existed? So ergot may sound interesting, but it does not solve the whole mystery. Another theory says this was a form of mass psychogenic illness, a physical outbreak driven by psychological stress and social contagion. And that explanation may sound modern, maybe even too clean, but it lines up with one important detail. The people of Strasbourg were not living in calm conditions. They were under intense pressure. And when people are pushed past the edge of what they can endure, the body sometimes speaks in ways the mind cannot. Maybe that is the real horror of the dancing plague. Not that people danced for no reason, but that they had reasons they could not name. Hunger, fear, disease, religious terror, economic pressure, grief. A world that felt unstable, a life that offered almost no control, and then one body broke in public, then another, until the whole city had to look at itself. This is why strange history is not just strange, it is revealing. Because the past looks bizarre until you realize people were still people. They had bodies like ours, fear like ours, crowds like ours, bad information like ours, authorities making confident mistakes like ours. And maybe that is why the dancing plague feels so uncomfortable, because it is easy to laugh at the city leaders. They hired musicians? Seriously? They saw people collapsing and thought drums would help? But then you start to wonder, what are the things we do today that future people will find insane? What are the cures we are confident about that only feed the problem? What are the public panics we amplify because everyone else is watching? What rhythms do we fall into without realizing we are no longer choosing them? Because Strasbourg's dancers were not just moving their feet. They were caught inside a system, a belief system, a medical system, a religious system, a social system, a fear system. And once enough people believed the dance was real, the dance became real enough to destroy them. That may be the most frightening thing about human beings. We do not only live in reality, we live in shared reality. And shared reality can heal people or infect them. Now, one detail often repeated about the dancing plague is that people died from dancing. Some versions claim that deaths occurred at the height of the outbreak. Some even claim many people died per day. But this is where we have to be careful, because the exact death toll is disputed. Contemporary records confirm the dancing outbreak happened, but historians debate how many people died, or whether the most dramatic death claims come from later retellings. And honestly, that uncertainty makes the story even more haunting. Because we do not need a massive death toll for this to be terrifying. Imagine dancing until your feet bleed. Imagine begging your body to stop and it refuses. Imagine watching your neighbor join the crowd, then your wife, then your brother, then wondering if you are next. Imagine the sound of music in the square, not because anyone is celebrating, but because the city believes the only way out is through exhaustion. Even without exact numbers, the image is unforgettable. A city trying to survive a dance it accidentally encouraged. A cure that became fuel, a crowd that became contagious, a mystery that still has no final answer. By September of 1518, the outbreak faded. The streets quieted, the dancers stopped, the city moved on because cities always move on. Markets reopen, church bells ring, people return to work, children are born, old rumors become stories, stories become warnings, warnings become history, and eventually, history becomes something people click on because it sounds impossible. The dancing plague, the city that could not stop moving, the people who danced without music, the leaders who hired musicians to cure them, the sickness that looked like joy from a distance and horror up close. But maybe the real lesson is not that people in the past were strange. Maybe the lesson is that human beings have always been fragile in groups. We are affected by what we see. We are shaped by what we fear. We can be pulled into rhythms we did not create. And sometimes when the pressure gets too high, the body tells the truth before the mind can. So the next time you see a crowd moving in the same direction, believing the same panic, repeating the same behavior, feeding the same fear, remember Strasbourg. Remember the woman who stepped into the street. Remember the doctors who said, keep dancing. Remember the musicians playing for people who could not stop. And remember this, not every plague begins with a cough. Some begin with a story, some begin with fear, and some begin with a single person moving strangely in the street, while everyone else watches just a little too closely.